Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by 417 Helmets. It's collectible helmets and more. Mini football helmets from just about every dead and forgotten football league you've ever heard of. Also, mini baseball helmets from the Negro Leagues, as well as custom helmets. You want your business or your organization represented in a cool mini helmet format? Hey, check them out. 417helmets.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
In 1936, Pacific Coast League team owner Bill Lane moved his Hollywood stars from Los Angeles to San Diego and into Sports Field, which had been rebuilt and renamed Lane Field. With his stars no longer in Hollywood, the team needed a new name.
So the newspapers, you had the San Diego Union, you had the Evening Tribune, and you had the Sun. All three newspapers had contests where people could submit names. These are some of the names that were submitted. There were the Dons, the Gales, the Aviators, the Flyers, the Sailors, the Pilots, the Gobs, that's slang for a sailor, the Pelicans, the Tunas, the Anglers, the Tars, the Aces, Balboas, Clippers, the Bears, Sandys, the Expos, Don Juans, of course the Padres was submitted, and the Twillers. What's a Twiller?
Although it wasn't the most popular in the newspaper's contest, one name stood out to the team owner.
Lane liked the idea of the Spanish influence, and so Padres was selected, and it was immediately a very popular name.
From 1936 until 1968, the Padres remained the Padres. But when San Diego was granted a major league franchise beginning with the 1969 season, the new big league team needed a name.
C. Arnold Smith is the owner of the team. He was the owner of the Pacific Coast League Padres, but Buzzy Bavasi comes in as the president. And Bavasi did not want any contact with the minor league operation. He said, this is a major league operation. He was very reluctant to use the name Padres.
C. Arnold Smith won the debate, and San Diego's major league team adopted the name of its minor league predecessor.
I think it's a great name to represent San Diego and our Spanish heritage. But for Father's Day, what better name could there be for a baseball team?
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hey now, how are you, everybody? My name's Tim Hanlon, and it's a Good Seat Still Available. Welcome and welcome back to the proceedings. Thanks for finding us, and we, of course, always appreciate you finding us in the vast sea of other podcast choices. We know you have a choice, and we appreciate you making us at least one of them this week. As we go to California. It's been raining hard there, but, you know, most of the time we find it an idyllic landscape. And in the realm of sports, pro sports, no exception, is the topic at hand. We're going to be talking with the self-appointed California sports guy. His name is Dan Cisco. Brand new book out called California Sports Astounding: Fun, Unknown, and Surprising Facts from Statehood to Sunday. And this is a book I would sort of put into the kinds of books that I rarely or occasionally sort of stumble across, become interested in. I sort of call them these sort of did you know category or genre of you know, sports books, little tidbits and factoids and anecdotal pieces of interest and stuff. And I'm really intrigued usually by flipping through those books. The first thing I do, and again, I'm not normal, right? So, but I usually look through these tomes and I search for truly things that I did not know. Maybe there's an obscure team or league or attempt at some kind of a sports event of some sort that I might have missed. That sort of eluded me, and I'm oftentimes surprised when I don't find any. Then I sort of say, "Nah, okay, thanks, but no thanks." But you know, there are a bunch of books like that out there. Another one I would highly recommend, actually, especially if you're from or have been a resident of the Chicago area, is the Armchair Companion to Chicago Sports by Richard Lindbergh. And Rich Lindbergh actually has been a long time historian for the Chicago White Sox. and highly recommend that because there's lots of great stuff about Chicago sports in there. But Dan Cisco is our guest this week. We're going to be talking about sort of the same kind of approach for California, and so all kinds of fun stuff. Our little clip there at the beginning from the what is it now called? It's called Bally Sports San Diego. I guess it was called San Diego. I guess it was a Fox Sports Net San Diego back in the day, but now it's known as Bally Sports San Diego. And frankly, given what's going on with regional sports networks and Bally Sports in particular, that it may not be the name of it, or maybe the entity may not even exist too much further. But I digress into wonky media business discussion. Sorry for that, but it's relevant. But that's a clip from, I think, about a year or two ago. And I'm sorry that I don't know the announcer's name. So I apologize for that. I did search pretty diligently, could not find his name. But Bill Swank is the guy who's quoted there. And he's probably somebody we should get on this little podcast talking about the beginning history, the naming of the San Diego Padres, and not necessarily the Major League Baseball version, which came in the late 1960s. But as we get into our conversation with Dan, the Pacific Coast League, we've had a number of different excursions into the PCL. And the Padres, if you may know, as you may know, or you should know, there you go, that's what I'm trying to say, were one of the long-standing teams in the PCL, the Pacific Coast League, which was essentially the West Coast version of professional baseball on many fronts. On a good day, a good week, certainly on a consistent basis, the teams that populated that league up and down the West Coast, a whole bunch of them in California, the Padres included. They were actually the formerly known as Hollywood Stars. They actually moved from Hollywood. Previous conversation we had with our pal Dan Taylor. The Padres obviously became the namesake for the Major League Baseball team that came after a while. There's a little controversy as to perhaps taking that name. But as we'll hear in our conversation, as just one of the many teams and leagues and sports and situations that Dan has attempted, and I'll underline that word, my word, to kind of collate in this first book. And as you'll hear in our chat, Dan fancies this as sort of the beginning or the early or first salvo, I guess, of something that probably will be living and breathing over time as the book expands and has other additions to it. It's perhaps a fool's errand to kind of try to encapsulate all of California's sports history in a 290-page book, but it's a start. And you'll hear in our conversation so many things in there and that are worthy of remembering and factoids and that kind of stuff. But clearly, it's very difficult to be comprehensive at that. You'll hear, in the Padres story, for example, a guy named Ted Williams, who you probably may have seen in Hall of Fame conversations over the years. We'll talk about his early years actually with the San Diego Padres before he went on to Major League Baseball greatness. But we get into all kinds of things as you would logically assume. We'll talk a little bit about the Clippers and the NHL versions of the California Seals, the Cow Palace we talk about. We talk about the Dodgers and the Coliseum when they first moved here. Some obvious stuff, but also some not so obvious stuff. We talk about the AFL and a little bit about the origination of two of the teams in 1960 in California and why they sort of set up at that point, the LA Chargers and the Oakland Raiders, but not their actual name when they were first envisioned in 1960. They had a different name, actually, and I didn't know this for about a week or two until they were renamed the Raiders, but you have to stay tuned as to what that was and all of that. And plus, stick around. We actually make suggestions for Dan, some glaring omissions from our perspective that he was good-naturedly accepting of, and hopefully will be part of the revised and second edition of California Sports Astounding. Our conversation this week with the California sports guy himself, Dan Cisco, coming up in a mere moment or two. First, let's tip our San Diego Padres cap in the general direction of our pals at oldschoolshirts.com. That's P.F. Wilson. otherwise known as Patrick Francois Wilson. And oldschoolshirts.com. It's promo code time for you there at Good Seats. Promo code is Good Seats. One word or two, I think both work, for 10% off all of your purchases when you go to oldschoolshirts.com. Amazing stuff. As always, we talk about them all the time. Lots of really cool collections. They have a new Bozo the Clown collection. And they also have a relatively new Evel Knievel connection. And this is to augment their other great collections in things like food and amusement parks and beer labels of the past and all those kinds of things. But of course, we love oldschoolshirts.com for their comprehensive and always growing collection of sports team and league shirts, stadiums, and that kind of stuff. And as you could commemorate our conversation with Dan talking about California sports, they have a convenient section there on oldschoolshirts.com. You just go to the cities tab, and you can literally see all the major cities, metropolitan areas in the United States. Just go to the West Coast section, or West, and you'll see all the major cities of California, and you can actually, tool around and see some of the teams that we're going to be talking about, and a whole lot more that are discussed in this book that Dan wrote. So check them out. It's oldschoolshirts.com. If you haven't done it before, give yourself about a half an hour, because you're going to lose yourself in the goodness that is this website. And with any luck, you may make a purchase or two, and we, of course, would appreciate that. We got a couple of shekels of referral love when you do that. Oldschoolshirts.com, and, of course, important, use that promo code Good Seats for your benefit and ours. Save 10% off all of your purchases early and often, as we say here in Chicago, especially around election time. Oldschoolshirts.com. Thank you to PF and team, and we appreciate your longtime sponsorship of this here little show. All right, let's get into the chat, shall we? Let's talk about California sports. Here he is, Mr. California sports guy himself. Here's Dan Cisco and me. We had our conversation we had just a couple of days ago. Please, as always, enjoy. The premise of this little show has been sort of focused on exclusively, but obviously this overlaps your book and your focus here, and your title for sure, around a lot of the teams and the leagues and the situations in pro sports in particular that aren't around anymore for whatever reasons. And we love the defunct, we love the previously domiciled, the relocated, the abandoned, and all that kind of stuff, because just enormously intriguing and stuff. And I loved your book when I got a copy of it, because while not exclusively focused on that similar vein, it's definitely pockmarked with a whole bunch of them. And I guess I'll just start by sort of saying, give us the impetus for this book and the whole zeitgeist around being, I guess, the dean of all things California sports.
I'm not that old. I'm not the dean yet, but no, seriously. I'm a native San Diegan, native Californian, sports fan my whole life, retired research librarian. And I always enjoyed, looking for old books and articles about the sports history here, because there's so much going on and never gets boring. There's just so much. So many teams, so many personalities, and all that. So I really wanted to get a book that would preserve that history, be a part of California history as well. And it turned out to be a pretty fun project.
Well, I think you had me at research librarian, but I guess why California, though? Why could that be perceived, especially for those who don't live there or have not lived there? Give us a sense of why it as a state is so special, if you will, in regards to sports.
Well, everything, since we have about 10 to 15% of America's population, everything's just on a big scale here. We have the most number of professional teams, and we have all these, historic venues scattered around the state. I guess it's just more of everything. And, our statehood goes back 1850. So there's a reasonable amount of history to work with. And I don't know anything about Delaware or South Dakota or all the other wonderful states in America. And California is the one place I knew a little bit about. So I thought, hey, work from there. And I'm kind of glad I did, so.
Yeah, I think there's a synonymous nature, I guess, of California with a lot of different sports, especially sports that I want to say are unique to the state, but certainly endemic to it, right? So I think when people generally talk about things like volleyball or water polo or some of these other sports where maybe they're enhanced by the fact of persistently nice climate. I think,
Yeah.
I come from the East Coast. I live now in the Midwest, right? I think as a kid, I guess I remember seeing, professional football games and stuff being played in this always seemingly perfect in the midst of winter storms back on the East Coast games, right? In Oakland or in San Francisco or certainly Los Angeles, right? It's like, where is this magical and maybe mystical place?
Yeah. We're really, lucky to have this type of weather conducive to year-round training, and it's great for the fans. You can go and attend sporting events, year-round. It's not going to stop you. So I tip my hat when I see those pro sports, and I see a team like the Cleveland Browns playing in sub-zero weather. You see it on TV and the snowstorm, and the fans are there, and they're like, hey, we're still loyal to the team. We're still going to be out there. I'm like, wow, I couldn't do it.
Well, I got a whole bunch of sticky notes in this book, and maybe I'll just use this sort of as a riff, right? I mean, a bunch of your anecdotes in this book do relate to, frankly, some of those teams from, shall we say, colder or more established urban environments coming to the great oasis of California, right? I mean, you're mentioning, the football is a great example, right? I mean, there are teams from, the Rams, for example, or the old AAFC, and certainly some of the baseball teams, right? The big mass exodus of Brooklyn and the Giants of New York to California. I guess that's got to be a thing or a theme, right? And it's always a siren song, right? This California thing being so attractive, especially as a fertile, growing environment in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s when a lot of these teams made that leap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point, Tim. The media market is big, the weather's great, and these sports eventually made it here and established their own identity. And it was great, growing up watching the American Football League and watching what were the Los Angeles Chargers their first year, and then they moved to San Diego, and then they're playing the Oakland Raiders, and then you had all this come out and work its way out to California. Volleyball, sure, it was invented in Massachusetts, but now California, dominates volleyball. I mean, they produce the best volleyball players in America, and beach volleyball, which of course came from Hawaii, but made its way to Santa Monica, California, and from there just exploded. So yeah, all that movement and all that change was good because it brought things to a new level here, and we put our own spin on it, right?
Well, one of your anecdotes is one of our sort of favorite lost sports topics, and that's Will Chamberlain and the then International Volleyball Association in 1975. And for those who may have listened to some of our previous episodes, I mean, what was a complex cat on a whole bunch of different levels, but volleyball was probably the most, maybe not the most, but certainly one of the more curious elements of his life and lifestyle. I mean, he used it almost as relaxation, or other, exercising of other muscles, shall we say, to his basketball career. And lo and behold, he winds up being part of this, I think, still ever fascinating co-ed volleyball league in the mid to late 70s, where a whole bunch of teams were in the Southern California region.
Yeah, exactly. The Southern California Bangers, led by Will Chamberlain, and he was just Gail Goodrich, his Lakers teammate, was like, "Hey, check this out. Check out volleyball," So, but it was great. It was such a change of pace, and then he boosted the sport. He drew all this media attention to it, and it was something. It was cool. It was different, and volleyball is a great, exciting sport anyway. But he added another element to it.
As you're doing this, the research for this book, and give me a sense of like how you sort of wanted to figure out a way to categorize this stuff, because the state is so big, its sports legacy is gigantic, and not just in pro sports, but collegiate and amateur and all that kind of stuff. Where do you begin to kind of sort of sand it down into something that's thematic or a storyline or some kind of rubric, if you will? Because I got to think, number one, that's hard because there's just so much of it out there, so much information. And then number two, is this the first in a series or just one way of presenting it?
Well, Tim, you're right. The subject matter is so big. There's plenty of room for plenty of authors to write plenty of books here. But what I decided to do was just tackle it month by month and try to put in as many sports as I could. And it's not an encyclopedia. It's not meant to be. California Sports Astounding is a look month by month of a lot of the major and not so major, sports events in history. And it's my goal to do a revision of this book, let's say every 2 or 3 years, and add more to it and expand it. This book covers over 65 sports, but I started work on another 10 or 20 easily. So there's plenty of room for growth. And again, it's documenting and preserving this California history. So I'd like the book to grow over time and put in as many entries per month as I can.
Yeah, in some respects, the upper bound of that, right, is almost a calendar, right, of like literally day by day about what has gone on. I mean, obviously with the major events, right, not every single stinking game or statistic and that kind of stuff, but in theory, that's you could tell lots of stories that way, and chronologically, it would be frankly convenient for silly podcasters like us to kind of, have a countdown as to like what anniversary is approaching, so that we can obsess about
exactly.
it 40, 50, 60 years later, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a type of book you can just jump in at any point. It's more of a fun, breezy read. Let's see what happened in April or July or whatever. You're just jumping in and picking and choosing. And some of the months have several entries and others are a little bit lighter, but that's just for that particular month. But yeah, there's lots of stories still to be told, and I can add those. I mean, even like today, I was thinking about, looking back, okay, it's March 1st. So just as a loose entry in the book here, it's like, okay, that's when they decided to build America's second largest outdoor tennis stadium, and that was out in the desert. So that story is documented, and there's plenty of others. But yeah, that's what's kind of fun. And there's lots of little things that you want to know more about. So it's just I think it'll be good. Hopefully, if I can expand it and hassle all these people, hey, give me that book or give me that article or whatever. But it's been a lot of fun researching it.
What are what going into this, like what kind of sports and teams and situations like were like most intriguing to you that made you say, hey, I could do a sort of a book and become kind of almost a go-to expert of this kind of stuff? Were there any particular sports or teams or situations? I'm assuming you were a lifelong Californian and maybe had some allegiances as growing up, perhaps.
Well, the major sports is pretty obvious. You got hockey and baseball, football, and all that. But I wanted to discover maybe there was a couple of sports here that originated in California. And for me, the interesting story was the triathlon, which was introduced in France. That was the first triathlon in the world, but the first triathlon in America and California occurred in San Diego. So I had fun with that one because I'm a local San Diegan, and I live like 5 minutes away from Mission Bay, and that's where it was held. And so it's kind of fun to look at that, and then also research the history of the official state sport of California. Would you like to guess?
Yeah, I have no idea.
It is surfing, and of course, introduced in Hawaii. It was started in Hawaii, of course, and made its way out to California. And a couple of Hawaiian princes were on vacation in Santa Cruz, up in Northern California there. And they got out there on some wooden boards, and people were like, what is this? So that was kind of fun. And that's a very important sport here. Surfing has been designated by the state legislature as the official state sport. We've got 3 wonderful surfing museums in the state that preserve the memorabilia and all the wonderful history of the sport. And a runner-up to that sport was skateboarding. And they had a lot of votes. They had a lot of support as the official state sport. And there's a lot of people that skateboard, and there's a lot of contests and the whole bit. And we got Tony Hawk here, right, who basically took that sport on his shoulders and invented a whole industry kind of around it. He has been so successful. But the people, not everyone can live by the beach. Yeah, there's thousands of people that surf, but there's so many that don't live in that area, right? They live in the Central Valley or live in the mountain areas or desert. But skateboarding is very big, and it has its supporters and their own museum in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and 2 examples of the sort of weather endemic kind of benefit that in Los Angeles or Southern California or the California coastline, the natural benefits, if you will, of the state of California makes a ton of sense that those sports would be considered, even in the conversation, as being quote unquote official, and frankly, great evidence of how sports in California are uniquely entwined in that regard.
Right, exactly. And the wetsuit being invented in California. So, yeah, definitely all the water sports. I got a story in the book there about the big water ski competition, from Long Beach out to Catalina Island, where these guys are going 50, 60 miles an hour over open water. I mean, it's hard enough to do it in a bay or a lake. Like, can you imagine going out there in the Pacific? And, it's that kind of hardcore, dedication. And I'd like to, I wanted to give a lot of credit to these minor sports that don't necessarily get any media coverage or very little. So it's kind of fun to, put a few of those in as well.
Yeah, and we love that too, for sure. And at the end, we'll give you a few suggestions, even because I think there are a few that you might want to even look into that are probably worthy of the next edition. But I did learn a bunch of different nuggets as I was sort of coursing through this. So, for example, like you do a lot of storylines around teams either relocated or expansion, and you do give some good service to how some of the names, the nicknames of the teams were generated. And thing I didn't know actually was your description of the situation with the former Oakland Raiders. Now, obviously.
Oh yeah.
You want to give our story? I had not sort of understood this, but do you remember sort of the the original story of how they, well, started with a name and it didn't, sounds like it didn't work out early on in 1960.
I gotta find it in the stupid book. What day was?
I'll give you a hint. It was in I think it was it was 1960. I think it was in was it September or October. It's the Oakland Seniors.
Yeah. September 11th. Yeah, you're right. September 11th, 1960. Man. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's that story with the, Baron Hilton, the hotel owner of the LA Chargers. He was threatening to basically yank his franchise unless a second team was put in California. And that's how the Bay Area got interested and excited and went after a team to add to the American Football League. I don't want to reveal the whole story, but if people are interested, I will say the Raiders did play at a lot of old stadiums. There's some classic stadiums up there in the Bay Area, and they were right there.
Yeah, and the name situation, there was a different name. The Raiders had they had the name Seniors for 10 days, and it's an interesting situation as to why it didn't happen that way. But you're also mentioning facilities, and that's sort of another area we obsess about, especially ones that don't exist anymore or have some kind of legacy to them. And Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, clearly a place where a lot of fledgling teams actually still, I mean, the old, it's still being used in a much more modified way, but for a long time was the home of the 49ers, and some soccer teams played up there through the years as well. But you also go into, I'm fascinated by, every time I go up to the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm fascinated by this still standing construction known as the Cow Palace.
In
nearby Daly City. Yeah. So, I mean, give our audience a bit of a sense of that. I mean, the Cow Palace is almost, I'm sure people wouldn't sort of consider it this way, but I guess I would. Historically, it's almost, it's like it's worthy of historic preservation, given how many teams and leagues and situations, either temporarily or deemed full-time, that went through that facility and in pro sports.
Well, exactly.
Too.
They had the Oakland Oaks who played there for a while. They had a lot of basketball there, and of course rodeo. I mean, that's what it was all about, right? A lot of rodeo competitions. They just had concerts and everything else. But yeah, that was one of the big places in California, famous sporting venues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the San Francisco Seals of the Pacific Coast Hockey League, and then I think, I don't know if the California Golden Seals of the NHL, I'm sure they had a dalliance or two with that. But I think also one of the more famous ones too is the LA Coliseum. When the Dodgers arrived, it was the temporary home of the Dodgers, and boy, how oddly shaped and situated that was, and gigantic crowds. But you look at some of those pictures. I mean, the Coliseum was put into interesting use to house a baseball team for a few years.
Yeah, definitely. They were drawing 70, 80, 90,000 fans to see baseball there. Amazing. And then that was before Chavez Ravine and the Dodger Stadium were finished. But that's true. That was an interesting and great baseball venue. And then you have the original Candlestick Park in California. When you go there in the middle of summer on an August afternoon at 12 noon, the sun is beating down and you've never been colder in your life.
Yeah, the fog and the cool winds, and Candlestick Park was a unique, and oddly so. I think somewhat cherished in certain people's minds, but I don't know. I think most people probably were pretty happy to sort of see it evolve into where they currently are now in that gorgeous park right by the bay there. What do you, another thing you kind of also talk about, and this is also indicative, I think, of California's sports history is, we spent a lot of time in this show over the years talking about, these major leagues or challenger leagues, for that matter, expanding, looking westward after historically being more rooted in the Northeast or the Midwest. I mean, baseball certainly is probably the most prominent example. But you do spend a bunch of time, a lot of different anecdotes on the minor league baseball front. And I think people kind of forget that, in the 40s and the 50s, even maybe earlier, the Pacific Coast League was pretty darn good, if not almost equivalent to some of the teams, if not most of the teams in way back east and in the Midwest. And the harbinger, frankly, of what was to come with baseball when Major League Baseball finally discovered, if you will, California years later.
Well, that's true. The Pacific Coast League could stand toe-to-toe with any of those teams in the majors. That's how good. That's the level of talent, not just Joe DiMaggio, a famous example, but there was so many players scattered up and down that coast. And of course, California being a part of this, but definitely high quality play. These guys were being groomed to go to the big show. And here they were. I mean, you could see them. You could see them before they were a superstar. So, great memories. You had Lane Field in San Diego, which was downtown on the waterfront. And then you had Wrigley Field in not Chicago, but Los Angeles, right? The Los Angeles version of Wrigley Field, and many other venues all throughout the state.
Well, interestingly too is the story of the Padres, not the current version, but the PCL version. And you have a really interesting anecdote about a certain Ted Williams. Maybe you can kind of give our audience a little sense of that, because there's a really good example of seeing a player before he's still kind of ripe on the vine, but it's also an interesting quirk that you sort of pick out there.
Well, Ted was a pitcher. People forget that. And he had his own short career as a pitcher, but that's where he really got his start with the Padres. I mean, he was the guy was 17 years old. I mean, they practically raided high school. They yanked him out of high school and have him start playing. I mean, they knew he was going to be something very, very special. But thankfully, his pitching career was short, and he moved around, and he got settled, and the rest is history, right? Even though he was in Boston all those years, I mean, the California baseball fans were rooting like crazy for him. I mean, he was one of our own, and I mean, to me, still the best pure hitter, or one of the best, at least one of the top 5 all time in baseball history, who could do it all.
So when you're doing research for this, give us a sense of some of the sports or situations that you learned for the first time, that you discovered in this process? Because I can't imagine that you knew all of these tidbits and facts going in. I'm sure you found some interesting discoveries along the way, because there's just so many facts and stats here in this book.
Tim, I had to go back to Statehood, which is September 9th, 1850. So the reality is, I probably knew only about 10% of this stuff. I really wanted to go back and document it from that point onward. I mean, I didn't want to go on anything prior. That would have been too complicated. But looking at each sport, I had never really looked into it from 1850 to, let's say, 1900, when a lot of these sports were finally invented. So I knew a little bit here and there, but it was interesting to see how these sports, evolved over time. I remember as a kid watching roller hockey on the black and white TV, the LA T-Birds, women's roller hockey.
Yeah, roller derby. Yeah. Did you ever question whether it was real or not?
Even as a kid, I was like, I don't know about this. I was scratching my head,
Yeah,
but
I think San Francisco. I think San Francisco is kind of a hotbed for that, right? I think it wasn't that where like, oh come on, Saperstein or his son or somebody. I can't remember his name, and I shouldn't have brought it up without remembering.
They had teams at the state. San Francisco and LA. And then they've tried to revive the sport over the years. I mean, I guess back in 1993, they had a roller hockey international where they were trying to revive the sport. And San Diego's team was called the Barracudas, They had fun with that. But the prime time, the glory years were the 50s and 60s. And in this book, I wrote about Francois Jacques Lalane and how he introduced sports and actual, taking care of yourself as sports and exercise as a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah, or calisthenics, if you will, right?
Calisthenics on TV, and then he opened up basically the first gym in America. I mean, he's given credit for introducing an actual gym where people could go and exercise and build strength. And people were like, what's this guy doing? He was so far ahead of his time. And he just built everything, from that point onward. But it was great to see. You can imagine, I mean, he was a big deal. He was on national TV every week with his show.
Give me a sense of when you're digging into these stories, and how do you, as a professional researcher, how do you prevent yourself, or maybe you don't, from going down the rabbit holes and just sort of exploring to the point where you may have forgotten why you got there in the first place, and don't get to, and you're avoiding writing stuff and doing book work versus learning and discovering? Because I could see you could unravel a whole lot of things, and maybe you did in this process, and maybe not get a lot of work done in the pursuit of a book.
Tim, I had a lot of stuff left over. There's tons of boxes and pages in my office, and a lot of things that didn't make it. But I really tried to just stay focused on, I wanted to help people discover when sports were introduced here, kind of how they involved, put a story or two, some fun question and answers to go with it. So each entry ended up being 2 pages. And if they were not limited to that, yes, I could have gone down a rabbit hole. But I think I had a good structure to work with. And that's what I used for each entry. I tried to come up with something that was fun and unknown, hopefully, by most sports fans. And that's how I approached it.
And what do you think you learned sort of in this exercise, and where do you think it goes from here? Because it seems like you probably have tapped into a vein that can be further explored, exploited, made more derivative. There's probably you probably could do it by sport. Maybe you could do it by, there's a lot of different sort of angles that you could do this.
True.
Yeah.
It's true. You're right, Tim. There are a lot of different angles, but I think like I say, I'd like to expand the book, more coverage and more sports. In this process, I learned how much I did not know, even though I'm a lifelong sports fan, listening on the radio to Vin Scully, watching on TV, watching Dick Enberg, on and on and on. But even as a lifelong sports fan, I discovered how much I didn't know. And the good thing is that we have a starting point now. I believe every state should have their own book. If you're in Michigan, there should be a Michigan sports history book from day one. I mean, that's part of their state's history, right? So, California's a little bit bigger, but I'm hoping to expand it and go from there, because if I just do one sport, I'm just leaving out so much. But I don't want to do an encyclopedia. I'll croak before that's over, before that's done. But I think the main thing is to keep looking and keep discovering new things. And I'm learning new things all the time. So it's fun, it's interesting, and I hope the sports fans like it.
All right. Well, as threatened, I got a couple of suggestions for you. So not that you're asking, but I think the North American Soccer League, I didn't see there. I know there's some Major League Soccer in there with the arrival of the San Jose Clash, but I highly recommend looking into that, like the Los Angeles Aztecs, for example, and the San Diego Sockers.
San Diego Sockers. Yeah.
And then also the equally interesting and intriguing indoor soccer thing, and there's where the San Diego Sockers come back roaring into legendary status. I think they are still standing now as part of the major what they call it, Major Arena Soccer League. But I think they have more in professional indoor soccer titles than any team ever.
You're right. You're right about that.
Right. World Team Tennis could make which still exists today, but our long promised but still not yet delivered guest Jeannie Buss, who under the tutelage of her father, I think that was the first kind of real professional sports experience that she got, was kind of running this team that Dad got for her birthday back in the 70s that Dick Enberg used to also love too. I think he was like an official voice of it. And then last but not least, you mentioned Roller Hockey International. Our dearly departed friend Dennis Murphy was a guest on the show a couple of times, and that's certainly and RHI was actually part of Jeannie Buss's sports empire and stuff. I also wonder if there are some perhaps some racetracks. Like I know we've done a couple of spins on some forgotten racetracks over the years. I know Riverside in Ontario, right? Two still very highly regarded and well remembered racetracks, even though I think Riverside only lasted 10 years, maybe, or Ontario. I mean, it wasn't neither were long, but they were important in the IROC series and some NASCAR stuff. And anyway, but it's also a fool's errand, right? Because there are so many things, right, that you know what on and on about, right? But those are some that I would look for if I were looking for your next edition. But that's just me.
You know what? I appreciate those suggestions, because was poking around and looking at a few of the old racetracks, especially up in Gardena, suburb of LA, and in the Central Valley, Fresno, Sacramento. But yeah, that's definitely worth pursuing.
But there's discussion that Fontana may actually go away. The race that was just there over the weekend in NASCAR. Which itself would only be 25 years young. So,
well, it's funny you mentioned World Team Tennis, because I was reading up about it. That co-ed tennis league. And back in 1984, San Diego had a team, and their nickname was the Buds, Buds. And I always wondered, was that something they were smoking, or was that something they were friends, or can you imagine? I mean, what's the mascot look like?
Well, at least you could spell it, and it would easily fit on the jersey. Unlike, let's say, the ABA Conquistadors.
Oh,
right?
I went to a game. I got to tell you real quick. I went to a game, the San Diego Conquistadors, and they were playing at Peterson Gym on the San Diego State University campus, a gym that held 3,600 seats. And you know why they were playing there? Because San Diego State was playing their games at the Sports Arena. The Sports Arena, the proprietor of the Sports Arena was arguing with the owner of the Conquistadors. So he kept him out of the Sports Arena as punishment. So you had a college team playing in a 14,000 seat arena, and then you had a pro team playing at Peterson Gym. So it was just crazy. I just remember that.
Well, and that right there is, to me, is like a perfect story and well worth investigating. And to give me an excuse actually to get some pictures of some of the jerseys when they just had the letter Q on them, right? Instead of the whole visitor, right? So, and then that obviously unfolds into the wacky world of the Clippers and San Diego and Bill Walton and all that stuff coming from Buffalo and then going to LA and then maybe all that stuff, right? So again, to me, this is a thread that you keep pulling and the sweater will keep on giving.
Yes.
So I wish you nothing but the best. How about some promotion? Tell us what it is, where else you're promoting. And it sounds like you're standing yourself up as a go-to resource for press inquiries when any query from the press about California and sports comes along. No?
Yeah, you're right, Tim. I'm hoping that they'll consider the book. It's California, Sports Astounding, Fun, Unknown, and Surprising Facts from Statehood to Sunday. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, plus the website, www.californiasportsastounding.com.
And you hinted that I think you also mentioned in the book too that you're maybe dangerously opening yourself up to people suggesting ideas and topics and stuff for your ongoing efforts. Correct?
That is correct. And you know what? I think it's really valuable because these sports fans, they have their vested interests, but they always bring up something new and interesting for me. So I'm like, hey, just bring it on, send it to me. I mean, there's no guarantee I'm going to put it in the book, but we can certainly explore the idea and give, coverage and interest, expand the interest on sports that would not usually get it, right?
Yeah, no, I also think it's a healthy approach when you take on the task of trying to be historical, some level of comprehensiveness, or certainly accuracy, because as we've learned and discovered, and in our obsession, right? I mean, it's doubly hard when you're talking about teams or leagues or situations that go belly up or defunct or things relocate and that kind of stuff, because they can be dead ends and literally can be very difficult, if not impossible, to ascertain stuff, right? So you'll see the dreaded question mark when did the team depart? Because it can be conjecture. It may not have been a league like, say, the National Women's Football League of the 70s that was covered in certain places, but not sort of comprehensively. And even in those places, those places may not have risen to the level of library microfiche or LexisNexis databases, right? So the research becomes harder, becomes more of a sleuthing kind of exercise. And look, the other issue too, and maybe again, more unsolicited advice, but the one thing that I've always loved to try to pursue, and I've always found sort of the highest quality of our conversations, is the more people who were directly involved, right? The primary sources that you can get to either quote or a memory or something. Obviously, the further back you go, the less number of those kinds of people exist anymore, right? But nothing beats even if it's a skewed memory, nothing beats an original remembrance if they were there. And the good news is, I think, and this leads me maybe into my last question, is we're always making more, right? I mean, this isn't a story that's going to end, right? There's only be more leagues, more teams, more ESPN Ocho type things, like with pickleball. I think I've seen now that there are, and here's the question embedded in here. Are we approaching potentially peak sports? I look at private equity now coming into sports, and I'm seeing things not only like three competing major pickleball leagues, but I think now that there are 4 legitimate volleyball leagues, 2 of which are going to be co-ed, that aim to be professional. And how many teams can Major League Soccer support? And Major League Rugby and cricket's coming now. And Wow, it's a lot out there.
There is.
Yeah,
And
I don't know if it's the best of times or the worst of times, because I wonder if there's enough economy to support them all.
Yeah, it's a good question, Tim. You wonder, is there enough disposable income to support these sports? There's just so much out there. You got to pick and choose. I love the variety. I love that things are out there and people are trying them. They're just going to experiment with them. If it works, great. If not, hey, so what? But there are so many right now. Like I said, I mean, I just did 65. I thought that was a lot, but in this world, you can easily look at 10 or 20 more sports and see where they're headed, and hopefully, add those down the road.
Well, it's great, especially if you're from California or you're California curious, shall we say. It's a great entree. It's a truly, you can sort of like open it up and go to a certain area, certain section and learn about whether it's some kind of a event or race or team or situation. And it's almost like a sampler platter. And I worry for you because there's just so much more to explore that I wonder if you're ever going to be satiated. But maybe that's a good thing, because it gives you purpose, because it's a huge ball of yarn that you've made for yourself, and I think it's great, and plenty more stuff to come, I bet.
Yeah, Tim, you know what? I'm a retired librarian, and you're right. I mean, how big does the sweater get here? You keep making him bigger and bigger. As long as it's fun, and I love to do research, and hopefully contribute to knowledge. I won't be around forever, but hey, it's a start. Other people can look at that as a benchmark and then go from there, But yeah, we'll see what happens if I live long enough, right?
Well, none of us is getting any younger, but as long as it gives you passion and fervor for life and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have a reader here, and hopefully amongst some of our listeners as well too. So best of luck with it. Keep in touch and let us know further additions and maybe other spinoffs and that kind of stuff. And if we can be ever of help to you in that process, let us know.
Hey, Tim, I really appreciate that. Thanks very much for having me. I learned a lot today, and great talking to you.
All right, our thanks to Dan. I aired actually the amount of pages in this book is actually upwards of 330 or so. So it's more pages than I gave it credit for at the outset of the show. So apologies for that, but it is fun. You'll get lost in it if you're from California or have just visited, or maybe you just don't care about California, but you're interested in sports trivia and history and that kind of stuff. And our little obsession was sort of about teams and leagues and situations that don't exist anymore on the pro level. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in there around college and amateur sports and events and all kinds of. It really is a treasure trove of trivia. And it's just getting started, as you heard Dan describe. The book, again, is called California Sports Astounding, subtitled Fun, Unknown, and Surprising Facts from Statehood to Sunday. It is published by La Jolla Shores Press, and it is available for you now, wherever you find good books. And, of course, you can go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, and you will find a convenient link from this episode numbered 294, and you will find a convenient link there to Amazon, and that will whisk you away to the purchase scenario for said book, and we will get a couple of shekels of referral love by doing so. We appreciate that very much. But I think you'll find it fun and a great way to pass the time. And literally, you can just open it up, spin the dial, if you will, open up to any page, and you'll be treated to a piece of trivia or two. Likely stuff that you didn't know, maybe just something to add to your dinner party repertoire. And thank you to Dan for sharing that with us. With that, we remind you that we are not only available at goodseatsstillavailable.com, where you'll find all of our old episodes and all kinds of supportive imagery and the like. We encourage you to bookmark that one. Also, you can send us email if you'd like. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And let's see what else. On social media, you can follow us too. On Facebook, you'll find a page devoted to us there. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still. And of course, on the Twitter, we're at Good Seats Still. So be sure to give us a follow there. If you like what you hear, please, by all means, wherever you download or subscribe or follow this show, we're available wherever you really get podcasts. If there's an opportunity, a place, a chance to rate us with the proverbial 5 stars, maybe some nice comments along the way too. Constructive criticism, yeah, I talked too long, I already know that. So come up with something different. We appreciate it very much. That helps other people like you who might be interested in this topic, this show, etc., to find it. And it helps the algorithms. We appreciate that too. It's the least you can do. You're not paying for it, so why not? Thank you for doing that. And our thanks, of course, as always, each and every week to the great Jerry Payne. Jerry Payne, Audio Excellence. Thank you once again for more audio excellence this week, kind sir. Thanks for listening, as always, friends. Till next week, ta-ta.